I wasn't supposed to be in that courtroom. I had no reason to be there. I wasn't a lawyer. I didn't work for the court. I was just a woman in a worn jacket sitting in the back row of the public gallery, holding a cold cup of coffee and watching a woman's life fall apart. My name is Callista Reyes. I'm 38 years old. I spent 7 years as a combat medic in the U.S. Army, serving in 3 overseas deployments. I know trouble when I see it. And the woman standing alone at that defense table was in very serious trouble. Lena Whitaker was famous. Her face had been on business magazine covers. She had built a medical supply company from nothing into a global operation worth over $2 billion. But none of that mattered right now. She looked like someone who had just been punched hard in the stomach. Her lawyer, a silver-haired man named Arthur Voss from one of the most expensive firms in the country, had just done something I had never witnessed before. He quietly closed his leather folder, straightened his tie, and announced to the court that he was withdrawing from the case. Effective immediately. The judge stared. The prosecution smiled. Lena's mouth fell open. I felt something heavy turn over in my chest. I knew this case. I had been watching it for months. I knew something no one else in that room knew. I stood up. Stop the court. My voice was calm. But every head in that room turned toward me. The judge's eyes landed on me like a spotlight. Who are you? She demanded. Her voice had the sharp edge of someone who did not appreciate interruptions. I walked slowly down the center aisle. My jacket was plain. My shoes were worn. I was nobody in a room full of expensive suits, and every person there made sure I felt that with their eyes. Your Honor, I said, stopping just before the wooden barrier separating the gallery from the court, my name is Callista Reyes. I am a former United States Army combat medic. I served 2 tours overseas, including a humanitarian mission in Kasari province 4 years ago. The room was still. The judge studied me carefully. Lena Whitaker was staring at me too. Her expression was different from the others. Not amusement or annoyance, it was confusion mixed with something close to raw desperation. One of the prosecution attorneys, a sharp-faced man named Conrad Halley, let out a short laugh. Your Honor, whoever this woman is, she has absolutely no business. I know exactly why they want her silenced, I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Something changed in the air. Like the pressure drop before a serious storm. The judge leaned forward slowly and removed her reading glasses. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she held up one hand, silencing the prosecution table. Give this woman 30 seconds, she said quietly. I took one slow breath. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I kept my voice steady. The kind of steady you learn when you are treating a wounded soldier and enemy fire is somewhere close. Panic never helps anyone. 4 years ago, I was part of a U.S. Army humanitarian mission deployed to Kasari province. We were distributing medical equipment to civilian clinics across the region. The equipment came from several contractors. One of those contractors was Lena Whitaker's company, Whitaker Medical. I paused to let that land. The shipments arrived late. When they finally arrived, critical supplies were missing. Medicines, surgical kits, oxygen equipment. 3 civilians died in one clinic because a ventilator they were waiting on never showed up. I filed a report. My commanding officer filed a report. Conrad Halley was already on his feet. Objection, Your Honor. This woman has no legal standing. She is not an attorney. She is not a party to this case. I'm a witness, I said quietly. What I witnessed overseas directly contradicts the story this court is being told about Lena Whitaker. Your Honor. The judge raised her hand sharply. Mr. Halley, sit down. She looked at me with careful eyes. You are claiming the supply failures were not the fault of the defendant? I am claiming they were caused by someone else, I said. Someone who deliberately rerouted those shipments. Someone who allowed people to die for profit. Lena Whitaker was gripping the edge of the defense table hard. She looked at me like she was only now beginning to understand what she had truly walked into. "You're being framed," I told her directly. The court recessed for the day. I watched Arthur Voss gather his briefcase near the side door. He was moving quickly, not looking at anyone. His shoulders were tight. His movements were rushed, like a man trying to disappear before someone noticed him leaving. I caught up with him in the hallway. "Mr. Voss," I said. He stopped but didn't turn around right away. When he finally faced me, his expression carried a heavy mix of guilt and something much darker, fear. "I don't know who you are," he said quietly. "I know you don't. But I need to know why you walked out on her in there." He glanced around the corridor. It was mostly empty now. A security guard stood at the far end, too distant to hear us. Voss lowered his voice. "Walk away from this case," he said. "Take whatever you think you know and bury it. You don't understand who you are dealing with." "Then help me understand," I said. He shook his head slowly. His jaw was tight. "Powerful people forced me out. They didn't ask nicely. They made it very clear what would happen to my firm, to my family, if I continued representing her." He picked up his briefcase. "This case is not what it looks like. And the people behind it do not lose." He turned and walked quickly toward the exit. I stood in that empty hallway and watched him go. My hands were calm at my sides. But I could feel the danger tightening around this situation like a knot being pulled from both ends. I found Lena Whitaker sitting on a stone bench outside the courthouse steps. Her security team was nearby, but she had asked them to give her space. She looked smaller without the courtroom around her. Not weak, but deeply tired. Like someone who had been fighting for a very long time. She looked up when I approached. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Her voice was direct. No softness in it. I sat down on the far end of the bench. "Because I was there," I said. "Because I watched people die, and the report I wrote got buried. And because the same people who buried that report are now trying to put you in prison." She studied me. "You were a medic." "Yes. Not a lawyer. Not an investigator. A medic." "Yes." She shook her head slowly. "Why does a medic get involved in a corporate fraud trial?" I looked out at the street. Taxis moved past. People walked by in the afternoon light, busy with ordinary lives. I thought about the clinic in Kasari province. About a father who died waiting for equipment that should have arrived 2 weeks earlier. "I treated the victims of that sabotage," I said. "Some survived. Most didn't. Their families deserved justice. I tried to get it through proper channels and got shut down every time." I turned and looked directly at her. "You are the only active case left that connects to what I witnessed overseas. You are their last chance at the truth coming out." Lena was quiet for a long time. Then she nodded once, slowly. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and pulled out a small black flash drive. It wasn't much to look at. But I had been carrying it for 2 years, moving it from apartment to apartment, keeping it in a fireproof box whenever it wasn't on my person. It was the most important thing I owned. I placed it on the bench between us. Lena stared at it. "What is that?" "Field recordings," I said. "I made them during the Kasari mission on my personal device. Military-issued recorders had to be submitted officially, but personal recordings existed in a gray area. My commanding officer didn't know I had them." She looked up. "One of those recordings," I continued, "was captured the night before the shipment sabotage. I was near the logistics tent by accident. I had gone looking for a misplaced medical kit. 2 men were talking inside. I heard enough to know something was wrong, so I kept recording." "And the voice?" she asked. "Distorted. Deliberately, I think, which tells me whoever it was knew they could be overheard. But names were used. One name in particular. I let that sit. Garrison Crane," I said. "Chief Procurement Officer for Calumet Holdings. The man who is currently the prosecution's star witness against you. Lena's face went very still. He is on that recording, I said, discussing exactly how to redirect those supply shipments through shell companies so they would never reach Kasari province. She picked up the flash drive with both hands and held it carefully. The next morning, I was back in courtroom 14 of the Harlow Federal Courthouse. The gallery was fuller than the day before. Word had spread quickly. A medic with no legal training had interrupted the trial of one of the country's most prominent businesswomen. That kind of story travels fast. Lena sat at the defense table alone. The chair beside her, where Voss had sat, was empty. The prosecution team looked comfortable. Conrad Halley was straightening papers and speaking quietly to his assistant. They believed this was already won. Judge Patricia Harmon settled behind the bench and looked at the defense table. Ms. Whitaker, you still have no legal representation? Lena stood. That is correct, Your Honor. Do you intend to proceed unrepresented? Lena hesitated. I watched her from the gallery. She wore the same determined look she had carried since the moment Voss walked out. But I could see the uncertainty sitting just behind it. The judge was about to move forward. I stood up. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. Your Honor. The room went quiet again. Judge Harmon looked at me with the steady expression of someone who remembered me very clearly from the day before. Ms. Reyes, she said slowly. You are here again. Yes, Your Honor. I am not asking to represent Ms. Whitaker. I held her gaze steady. But I can prove this case is built on a lie. I am asking to testify as a witness. The room was absolutely silent. Not a single person moved. The objections came fast and loud. Conrad Halley was on his feet before I finished my sentence. Your Honor, this is completely irregular. This woman has no legal standing here. She cannot walk into a federal proceeding and demand to testify. She is not demanding, Judge Harmon said calmly. She is requesting. And I have discretion to call witnesses with relevant testimony. Another prosecution attorney stood. The government strongly objects. Noted. The judge set down her pen and looked at me. Ms. Reyes. You stated yesterday that you have evidence relating to the supply chain sabotage central to this case. Is that accurate? Yes, Your Honor. And you were personally present during the events in question? Yes, Your Honor. I served as a combat medic on the humanitarian mission to Kasari province. I witnessed the supply failures directly and recorded evidence the same night the sabotage was ordered. She nodded slowly. The courtroom was wound tight. I could feel it, the weight of everyone holding their breath. I am going to allow this, she said. The gallery erupted. Halley slammed his hand on the prosecution table. The judge brought her gavel down hard, twice. Order. We will have order. When the noise settled, I was directed to the witness stand. I walked up slowly, placed my hand on the court Bible, and swore to tell the truth. I had been waiting 4 years for this moment. I looked out at the courtroom, took one quiet breath, and began. The person responsible for those deaths, I said clearly, is sitting in this courtroom right now. Every head in the room turned at once. Some looked at Lena first, out of habit. Then they followed my gaze. I wasn't looking at Lena. I was looking at the front row on the prosecution's side, where Garrison Crane sat in a charcoal suit with a gold pin on his lapel. He was the kind of man who wore his confidence like armor. Smooth. Prepared. Completely untouchable. Until that moment. He held my stare, his jaw tightening. This is absurd, he said loudly. Mr. Crane, Judge Harmon said sharply, you are not permitted to address this court from the gallery. Halley stepped in quickly. Your Honor, my client is not on trial. This witness is making reckless accusations. I am not making accusations, I said calmly. I am presenting evidence. I described the recording to the court. I explained exactly where I was that night in Kasari province. The time, the location, the logistics tent near grid point 7 on the mission map. I described the voices I heard and what they said about rerouting supply pallets through a company called Barren Cross Logistics, which Army records later showed had no physical address and existed only on paper. Then the flash drive was submitted to the court's technical system. The room listened in complete silence as a section of the audio played. The voice on the recording discussed redirecting medical supplies, naming exact shipment codes that matched the ones that went missing from Kasari delivery records. Crane was gripping the armrest of his seat. His lawyers immediately demanded a recess. He no longer looked untouchable. During the recess, I stepped into the hallway and leaned against the wall. My legs were steady. My breathing was controlled. But my mind was moving fast. I had rehearsed what I said on that stand 100 times in the quiet of my apartment. Now it was out. Now it was real and it could not be taken back. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. A text message. Short. 4 lines. You made a mistake today. Drop this case and walk away. Go back to your quiet life. Or your daughter will suffer the consequences. My daughter. Zoe was 11 years old. She was in 5th grade at Belfield Elementary School. She lived with her mother across town. We shared custody on alternating weeks. She liked horses and drawing and anything to do with animals. She was the best thing in my life. My hands did not shake. I had been trained not to shake. But something cold moved through my chest and settled there. I pocketed the phone and walked back inside. Lena was standing near the defense table, watching me return. She could read something in my face. What happened? She asked quietly. I showed her the message. She read it. Her expression shifted, and something I hadn't expected appeared in her eyes. Guilt. Callista, she said. I'm sorry. I never meant to pull you into danger. You didn't pull me in, I said firmly. I walked in. With both eyes open. I pocketed the phone. And I am not walking back out. That night I sat at the small kitchen table in my apartment with files spread out around me. Army reports, incident logs, photographs from the mission, printouts of financial records that a military contact had quietly passed me before the investigation was shut down. I thought about Zoe. I called her before she went to bed. I kept my voice easy and light. She told me about a drawing she had made at school, horses running across mountains. I laughed at the right moments. She laughed too. After I hung up, the apartment was very quiet. I had first tried to expose the Kasari sabotage 18 months after returning from deployment. I wrote a detailed report and sent it to my battalion commander. 3 weeks later, an investigation was opened. Then, 6 weeks after that, it was closed. No explanation. No findings. Just a brief letter stating the matter had been reviewed and no wrongdoing identified. I pushed harder. I contacted a military journalist. The story was picked up by a small publication, then quietly killed before print. I reached out to a congressional aide. He told me the case was sensitive and to let it rest. Every door I knocked on closed before I could walk through. The threat tonight told me why. These people had long arms and short patience. But I had made a promise. Not to Lena Whitaker. Not to any court. I made it to the people in Kasari province who died waiting on a floor for equipment that never came. I was not walking away from that promise. The next morning brought a surprise. I arrived at the courthouse before the gallery filled, sat in my usual back row, and was reviewing my notes when the doors opened behind me. An older woman walked in. She moved with the straight posture of someone who had spent decades in uniform. Silver hair, a no-nonsense blazer, reading glasses hanging from a cord around her neck. She scanned the room carefully and then sat down 3 seats from me. I recognized her immediately. Colonel Harriet Vance. Retired. She had been the lead investigator on the Kasari supply inquiry before it was ordered shut down. I had submitted my original report to her team. She was the one who acknowledged receiving it, and 18 months later, signed the letter officially closing the investigation. I had blamed her for a long time. She turned and looked at me. "I know who you are, Callista Reyes," she said quietly. "I have been waiting for someone to open this door again." "You closed it," I said. "I was ordered to," she replied evenly. "And I signed that letter because I had a choice between signing it and watching the entire inquiry get buried so deep it could never be reopened. I chose the option that kept the records intact." She placed a folder on the seat between us. "Everything I could not submit officially," she said. "Correspondence between corporate lobbyists and senior officers. Names, dates, and amounts paid." She looked toward the front of the courtroom. "They forced the investigation shut. I kept the proof." Colonel Vance testified that afternoon. She was clear and precise on the stand. She described how the Kasari inquiry had moved forward smoothly until 3 men arrived at the base inquiry office. They were not military. They were representatives of Calumet Holdings, Garrison Crane's company. They met privately with her commanding general in a closed session that lasted over an hour. 2 days later, she received orders to shut the entire inquiry down immediately. She submitted her preserved correspondence to the court. It detailed payments made to a senior military liaison, routed through a consulting firm with no genuine business activity. The payments were timed directly to the closure of the investigation. More than that, the documents showed that after the supply shipments were rerouted, Lena Whitaker's company lost 3 major international humanitarian contracts, all quietly awarded to subsidiaries of Calumet Holdings. Billions of dollars changed hands. The prosecution sat very still throughout all of it. Conrad Halley finally stood. "Your Honor, the Colonel's testimony is interesting, but it does not prove that Mr. Crane personally authorized the sabotage. Corporate payments to consultants are not evidence of individual criminal conduct." He straightened his jacket. "And none of this," he added with a small, controlled smile, "proves that my client did anything wrong." I watched Garrison Crane carefully. He was leaning over to whisper to Halley. But I noticed his hand, under the table, pressed flat against his knee. It was trembling slightly. He was rattled. But he hadn't lost yet. And he knew it. During the lunch recess, I sat with Lena at a quiet corner table in the courthouse cafeteria. Colonel Vance had stepped away to make a call. Lena was eating nothing, only turning a pen over in her fingers. "Halley's right," she said. "The financial records show the motive and the cover-up. But we still need something that directly places Crane's name on the actual sabotage order." I nodded. "I had been turning this over all morning. There was a supply manifest," I said. "A physical document. Signed the night before the sabotage. It authorized the diversion of 4 shipment pallets from the Kasari delivery route to a secondary location. I saw it on the table inside the logistics tent the same night I made the recording." Lena looked up. "A signed manifest would be direct evidence," she said. "His signature on a diversion order would destroy their entire defense." "I know. But you don't have it." "No. Those documents were supposed to be destroyed during the mission pack-down procedure." I paused. "Supposed to be," I said again. 3 months ago, I had sent an informal message to my former unit supply officer asking whether any physical documentation from that mission still existed. He never replied directly. Then, 2 days ago, I received a single text from an unknown number. Just a 7-digit file reference code and nothing else. I had not known what to make of it at the time. Looking at that code on my phone now, I had a strong feeling I was about to find out. I stepped outside the courthouse during the afternoon break and made the call. The number that had sent the file reference code rang twice before a man picked up. "Ms. Reyes," he said. His voice was careful but steady. "Who is this?" I asked. "My name is Owen Briggs. Former Army Logistics Officer, 1st Supply Battalion. I served at Kasari Base during the humanitarian mission." I went very still. "You sent me the reference code," I said. "Yes. I'd been following the Whitaker trial. When your name appeared in the news reports yesterday, I knew it was time." He paused. I kept a copy of the supply manifest. The one authorizing the diversion of those 4 pallets. My heart was beating harder, but my voice stayed level. Where is it? I photographed it the morning after the sabotage because something felt deeply wrong. I have kept the photograph on an encrypted drive for 4 years, not knowing who to give it to or whether anyone would listen. I'm listening, I said. He told me he could reach the courthouse within 2 hours. I went back inside and found Colonel Vance near the gallery entrance. I told her quietly. Her expression did not change, but she exhaled slowly through her nose. Good, she said. We will need the signature confirmed. Do you know who the authorizing logistics officer on duty was the night that manifest was signed? No, I admitted. I do, Vance replied. She opened her folder to a page near the back and pointed to a duty roster entry. The name on it was Garrison Crane. Owen Briggs arrived at the courthouse just before 4 o'clock. He was a quiet man in his mid-40s with calloused hands and the habit of checking over his shoulder before speaking. He had driven 5 hours from his home in Callaway County and arrived carrying a sealed envelope and a small portable hard drive. The photograph was clear, high resolution, taken from directly above the document in strong light. The supply manifest was fully legible, every field visible. Shipment codes, diversion route, destination location, date, and at the bottom, the authorization signature line. Signed, G. Crane. We submitted it to the court before the day's session closed. Conrad Halley moved immediately to have it dismissed. Your Honor, this document cannot be authenticated. There is no proper chain of custody, no official military verification. I can authenticate it, Colonel Vance said from the gallery, firmly enough for the entire room to hear. Judge Harmon looked at her. Colonel, are you offering expert testimony on this document? Yes, Your Honor. I was the officer responsible for all mission documentation during the Kasari deployment. I personally reviewed and cataloged this manifest category. I can confirm the document format, the shipment codes, and the duty roster placing Garrison Crane as the authorizing officer for that night. Halley turned back to the judge. Your Honor, we ask for a continuance. Denied, said Judge Harmon. She ordered a forensic examination of the signature. The courtroom was placed on hold. Garrison Crane was no longer sitting in the gallery. His lawyers had quietly escorted him to a private room down the hall. I sat back and waited. The forensic examiner returned her findings the following morning. The courthouse was packed tighter than any previous day. People who had never heard of Lena Whitaker before last week were now crammed into every available seat. Camera crews from 2 news stations waited in the corridor outside. The examiner, Dr. Rosario Fenn, was composed and precise in her delivery. She had compared the signature on the supply manifest with 3 verified samples of Garrison Crane's handwriting obtained from his company's own public filings. She spoke for 12 measured minutes. At the end, she stated the following: the signature on the supply manifest is, in my professional opinion, authentic. The characteristics of the letter forms, pressure points, and stroke patterns are consistent across all verified samples. I find no evidence of forgery. The courtroom was completely silent. Then a sound rose through the room slowly. Not applause, this was a federal court. But a murmur, a release of held breath, the sound of a room understanding what had just been confirmed. Judge Harmon looked at the prosecution table. Conrad Halley was staring at the surface in front of him. He was writing nothing. Mr. Halley, the judge said. Does the government wish to respond? Halley stood slowly. Your Honor, we need a brief recess. You may consult on your own time, Judge Harmon said evenly. She turned and looked at Lena Whitaker. Ms. Whitaker, she said clearly, the charges against you in this matter are dismissed. Lena's hand went to her mouth. I let out a long, slow breath. The chaos in the courtroom rose like a wave. Reporters were on their phones before the judge had fully stood. People in the gallery were talking over each other. Lena stood at the defense table with both hands pressed flat on the surface, her head bowed, shoulders shaking. I stayed in my seat for a moment. Then I noticed something unexpected. Two men and a woman near the side wall stood up and moved toward the front with quiet, deliberate steps. They were not press. They were not court staff. Their jackets were plain and dark, and one showed something to the bailiff briefly. Federal badges. One agent spoke quietly to Comrade Hallie. Hallie's face changed immediately. Then the agents moved toward the private room where Garrison Crane had been escorted during the continuance. I caught Colonel Vance's eye across the room. She gave a single slight nod. I walked over to her. "Who are they?" I asked. "Federal investigators," she said quietly. "They have been monitoring this trial from the beginning. What you exposed today did not only affect this case. Crane's operation connected to at least 4 other supply chain frauds across 3 countries." She paused. The Kasari sabotage was just one piece of something much larger. I let that settle. "How long have they been building their case?" I asked. 2 years, Vance said. They needed someone to open the door from inside. I thought about the report I filed 4 years ago. The doors that closed. And the one that finally opened. Outside the courtroom, in the wide marble hallway, federal agents moved in both directions. 2 were already inside the private room with Garrison Crane. Another pair was speaking with Hallie near the main exit door. I stood against the wall and watched it all happen calmly. Quietly. The way I had always watched things. Lena found me there. She was still composed. That was something I had noticed about her from the very beginning. Even in the worst moments, she held herself together. But the edges of her eyes were red. "Callista," she said. "Ms. Whitaker." "Lena," she corrected, the way she always did when I used her last name. She stood close and spoke in a low voice. "I want to make sure you are taken care of. Whatever you need. Legal protection, financial support, anything at all." "I don't want anything," I said. She stopped. "I mean that respectfully," I added. "But I did not do this for you." I could feel the importance of saying it, not harshly, but honestly. Because the truth was what this entire fight had been about. I did this for the families in Kasari province. For the 3 civilians who died in that clinic waiting for a ventilator that was sitting in a warehouse somewhere while Garrison Crane signed its diversion order. I looked at the floor for a second, then back at her. Those people couldn't be here today. I was. So I showed up. Lena was quiet. "Thank you," she said softly. I nodded once. That was enough for me. Outside the Harlow Federal Courthouse, the afternoon light was sharp and bright. Reporters waited at the bottom of the steps. Cameras, noise, and the kind of questions that follow a case like this one. Lena walked out first. They moved toward her immediately. I stayed a few steps behind. I wasn't there for cameras. But one journalist reached me before I could step back. "Ms. Reyes," she said. "You're a former medic. No legal training. Why did you stand up when trained lawyers walked away?" I stopped. I thought about Kasari province. The clinic with no ventilator. The report that went nowhere. 4 years of silence and closed doors. I thought about Zoe the night before, telling me about her drawing of horses and mountains, completely at peace. "In the army," I said, "when someone is bleeding, you don't wait for permission to help. You go. You do what you can. You stay until it is done." The journalist waited. This was no different, I said. I walked down the steps into the open street. The city moved around me, loud and ordinary. But I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. The weight of 4 years was lifting, slowly and surely, with every step. Justice does not always come quickly. But when it comes, it changes everything. If this story moved you, hit that like button and drop a comment below telling me what city you are watching from. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe and stay for the next one. You will not want to miss what is coming.